Did you wait long?" Her voice trembled soft as the falling snow. He stood there, the man everyone called untouchable, a billionaire in a gray coat, now dusted white, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold in his hand. No one inside the cafe could believe it. The man who never waited for anyone was still there in the storm, for a simple girl from a bookstore. She bowed her head, breath shaky. "I'm sorry I was late. I stopped to help an old man who fell." He didn't answer at first, just looked at her with something raw behind his calm. Then quietly, "That old man is my father." The words hung in the air like frost, and in that moment she realized the hour he spent waiting in the snow was nothing compared to the years he'd spent searching for the daughter of the woman who once saved his family. A chilling silence fell over the glass and gold cafe, but it broke quickly, curdling into an aggressive performative confusion. Lyre Voss, recovering first, let out a high, brittle laugh that scraped across the velvet room. "Oh, that's rich Elias. A coincident story right out of a daytime drama. The poor girl finds a stray on the pavement, and it just happens to be your long-lost patriarch. Spare us the cheap melodrama." She scoffed, gesturing widely to the assembled onlookers. Darren Coleth chimed in with a theatrical groan, leaning heavily on the joke. "Come on, Elias, even you can do better than that. If you want to elevate your mystery date, invent a better backstory. Perhaps she's a secret duchess." Mrs. Viren, however, did not laugh. She simply leveled a look of pure, cutting disdain at Seren. It was a silent decree that, father or no father, a person who stopped for a stranger and showed up late was fundamentally unfit for their world, a statement far more damaging than any loud insult. The manager, emboldened by the Vareth matriarch's expression, started inching closer again, clearly intending to physically escort the source of disruption, away his nervous smile, now twitching with ill-disguised aggression, determined to restore the cafe's perfect, untouchable order. "Hey, before we go on, grab your phone real quick. If this moment hit you as hard as it hit her, give this video a like, drop a comment below, and hit that subscribe button. It means the world to keep sharing stories like this. Stories that remind us what really matters. All right? Let's keep going." Serene Avalith stepped into the cafe, her boots leaving wet prints on the polished floor. The place was all glass and gold chandeliers, throwing soft light over velvet chairs. She looked out of place, her coat soaked her dark hair, tangled from the wind, no makeup to hide the flush on her cheeks. People turned to stare, their whispers sharp as knives. A woman in a red dress, dripping with diamonds, leaned toward her friend. "Who let her in here?" she muttered loud enough for Seren to hear. A man in a tailored suit chuckled, sipping his espresso. "Must be lost. This isn't the thrift store." Seren didn't flinch. She just adjusted her scarf, her fingers steady, and kept walking toward the table where Elias Calethorn sat. Lyre Voss stood by Elias, her arms crossed her sleek blonde ponytail, catching the light. She was his assistant, always polished, always perfect, the kind of woman who made sure everyone knew she belonged. She smirked as Seren approached. Here she is, the mystery guest. An hour late, and look at her. Did you walk through a car wash to get here? The room laughed a low, cruel hum. Seren stopped, her eyes meeting Lyre's. "I didn't know time was more important than people," she said. Her voice calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. The laughter died. Lyre's smile faltered just for a second before she turned to Elias. "You're really waiting for this." Darren Coleth, the CFO of Vareth Group, leaned back in his chair nearby, his Rolex glinting as he swirled his wine. Darren was all charm and ambition, the kind of guy who'd sell his own mother for a boardroom seat. He looked Serene up and down, his lip curling. "Elias, come on. She's not even in the right tax bracket for this place. You're embarrassing yourself." A woman at the next table, Mrs. Varen Elias's mother, adjusted her fur stole and sighed. She was elegance itself, her silver hair pinned perfectly, but her eyes were cold. "My son has better things to do than entertain strays," she said, her voice like a whip. Seren's hand tightened on her bag, but she didn't speak. She just stood there, her posture straight, her silence louder than their words. The cafe manager, a wiry man with a nervous smile, hurried over. "Miss, I'm sorry, but you're causing a disturbance. Maybe you'd be more comfortable elsewhere." He gestured toward the door, his tone fake polite. The room watched, waiting for her to crumble. Seren looked at him, her eyes steady. "I was invited," she said, and nothing more. The manager blinked, thrown off. He glanced at Elias, who hadn't moved his face, unreadable. The whispers grew louder. Invited. Her must be a mistake. A young woman in a silk scarf giggled. Maybe she's the new cleaning staff. Seren's fingers brushed the edge of her coat, adjusting it slightly, and the small motion carried a quiet dignity that made the giggles stop. Elias stood then, his chair scraping softly against the floor. The room went quiet. He set his cold coffee down, his movements deliberate, and walked towards Seren. Snow clung to his coat from waiting outside. "Let's go." He said, his voice low, not a command but a choice. He held the door open for her, and she stepped out into the storm without looking back. They hadn't taken 10 steps when a sleek black Vareth security SUV, which had been idling discreetly across the street, pulled suddenly into their path, its headlights blinding against the falling snow. Out stepped 2 burly men in dark uniforms, their faces neutral but their posture aggressively territorial. Serene instinctively paused her body, tensing, recognizing the silent, powerful tactic of corporate intimidation. This was not a random obstruction. It was a clear message that leaving the cafe would not grant her safe passage from the family's reach. Elias, still utterly calm, stopped as well, but his head tilted almost imperceptibly, a minute physical shift that held generations of implied power. He didn't raise his voice or even acknowledge the security detail, but he reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it aloft. The light from the screen illuminated his face for a moment, and the security guards, catching sight of the specific name and number Elias was calling, likely the head of Vareth's entire security apparatus, visibly hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly backed the SUV up, clearing the path without a single word being exchanged. The cafe erupted in murmurs. Lyre's face twisted, her nails digging into her palms. "This is a joke, right?" she said, to no one in particular. Darren shook his head, muttering, "He's lost it." Mrs. Varen just stared at the door, her lips tight as if she'd swallowed something bitter. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing Frostvale in white. Seren walked beside Elias, her boots crunching on the sidewalk. She didn't ask why he'd waited. He didn't explain. They passed a streetlight, and for a moment her eyes caught on a faded poster, taped to it, a photo of a building with her father's name, Avalith, scrawled in the corner. She stopped, her breath catching, then kept walking. Elias noticed but said nothing. They reached a small park where he gestured to a bench. 5 minutes, he said, sitting down. "I owe you that much." She sat too, her hands folded in her lap, snow settling on her shoulders. The next morning, Frostvale woke to headlines. Billionaire waits in snow for mystery woman. The papers were brutal. Who's the bookstore girl who kept Elias Calethorn? Waiting one sneered with a blurry photo of Seren, her wet coat making her look small and pathetic. Social media was worse. Gold Digger Alert, one post read, shared thousands of times. Lyre forwarded it to the Vareth group's internal chat, adding, "This is what we're dealing with now." Seren saw it all from the bookstore, where she worked, her phone buzzing with notifications. Her boss, a gruff woman with tired eyes, called her into the back. "Seren, I'm sorry, but you're done. This drama's bad for business." Seren nodded, packed her things, and left without a word. She walked home through the snow, her bag heavy with books she hadn't returned. A car honked, and she glanced up, catching sight of a black sedan, like the one her father used to drive. She was 6 again, sitting in the back seat, her father humming as he drove her to school. "You're my legacy, kid," he'd said, ruffling her hair. The memory faded as a kid on a bike sped by, splashing slush onto her coat. She kept walking, her face blank, but her hands shook as she unlocked her apartment door. When Seren finally reached her rundown apartment building, she found a cruel, almost theatrical display awaiting her. Someone had taken a large paint-stained canvas, a reject from her old art class, and crudely spray-painted across it in massive, ugly letters. "Get out, Gold Digger!" The sign was now nailed directly to her front door, a brazen act of vandalism meant to broadcast her humiliation to every neighbor. As she reached out to tear it down, a heavy, deliberate shadow fell over her. It was the cafe manager, the wiry man from the day before, standing a few feet away, sipping smugly from a disposable coffee cup, and clearly waiting to witness her distress. He finally set the cup down and gave her a chillingly fake smile. "Just making sure you got the community memo, miss. Some of us take our neighborhood's reputation very seriously." He sneered, his eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. Seren didn't yell or cry. Instead, she met his gaze, pulled a small utility knife from her bag, and slowly, deliberately began cutting the canvas away from the doornails, the action methodical and utterly silent. The manager's smile vanished, replaced by an unnerved, unsettled frown, as he realized her quiet focus was a far more formidable resistance than tears or pleading, and he eventually turned away, defeated by her sheer, unyielding lack of reaction. Inside, her phone lit up with a message from Elias. "I owe you a thank you." She stared at it confused, then tossed the phone onto the couch. Leray wasn't done. She cornered Darren at the Vareth office, her voice low but venomous. "She's making him look like a fool. We need to fix this." Darren nodded, already texting a reporter friend. "Don't worry, I've got this." By noon, a new article dropped, is Seren Ovalith after Elias Calethorn's fortune. It painted her as a schemer, a nobody trying to climb the social ladder. Mrs. Varon called Elias that night, her voice icy. "End this or the board will. You're risking everything." Hours after the attack article went live, Daran and Leray sat in Doran's luxury sedan, parked 3 blocks from Seren's building, conducting their next calculated strike. Doran scrolled through a private investigator's photo file until he found the picture of the modest, aging car Seren still drove, a sentimental relic from her father, parked in the back alley. He smiled thinly, confirming its location. Petty but necessary, Leray commented, applying a fresh coat of lip gloss in the rearview mirror. Darren then instructed a subordinate on the phone, his voice a low, clinical drawl. "I need 2 men to go to the provided location. Use the materials I sent. Make sure it looks like a random aggressive vandalism job. No fire, just complete visible expensive destruction of the engine bay tires and windows. I want her to wake up tomorrow and realize the things she holds onto from the past are not safe from us." He hung up, a cold, predatory satisfaction settling over his features. The deliberate, cruel targeting of her last tangible link to her father, not for financial gain, but purely to inflict emotional pain and assert control, was a sickening power play designed to break her spirit completely. Elias listened, his phone pressed to his ear, but his eyes were on a framed photo on his desk. A young boy in a hospital bed, a man's hand on his shoulder. He hung up without answering. Seren's landlord knocked on her door the next day. "You gotta go," he said, not meeting her eyes. "This scandal's too much. I can't have reporters sniffing around." She packed her things in silence, her hands steady as she folded her clothes. She found an old sketchbook in the bottom of a box, her father's designs, lines, and angles that felt like home. She traced one, a tower with sweeping arches, then closed it. As Serene carried the last of her boxes down the narrow, creaking staircase, she found Mrs. Delmar, a stern, elderly tenant who usually ignored everyone waiting on the landing. Mrs. Delmar held out a small, worn piece of paper, a signed petition from several long-term residents demanding Seren be allowed to stay, citing her quiet nature and the circumstances of the scandal. "It's a nasty business, Seren," the older woman muttered, her eyes fixed firmly on the floor. "But we know what gossip looks like. We sign this for you." Seren looked at the petition, her throat closing tight, with an unexpected well of emotion, a sudden piercing recognition that not every privileged person was her enemy. However, she gently shook her head, pushing the petition back. She reached out and deliberately, clearly squeezed Mrs. Delmar's hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bravery of the gesture. Her hands, though, did not tremble. They were firm as she carried the boxes out. Accepting the help would mean staying and fighting a small battle in a small building, but her posture, now rigidly straight, spoke of a decision to reserve her strength for the true fight, the one she hadn't yet defined but knew was waiting outside the building's peeling front door. Outside, the snow hadn't stopped. She walked to a diner, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window. A TV in the corner played a news clip, Elias Calethorn's mystery woman, troublemaker, or victim. She turned away, her fingers tight around the mug. A week later, Seren got a call from an old friend, Mara, who worked at a local library. "Seren, you okay? I saw the news. Did you know about Elias?" Seren frowned, stirring her coffee. "Know what?" Mara's voice dropped. "Your dad. He saved Elias's life. That collapse at Vareth Tower 10 years ago. Your dad pulled him out." Serene's hand froze. She hung up, her heart pounding, and dug through her bag for an old newspaper clipping she'd kept. There it was. Her father, dust-covered, holding a boy. The boy's eyes were Elias's. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling over, not for herself, but for the man who'd never told her he was a hero. Elias sent flowers to the bookstore the next day, even though she didn't work there anymore. The card read, "Frostvale Tower was your father's dream. Let me rebuild it for you." Seren held the note, her thumb brushing the ink. She didn't cry again. She walked to the library, found Mara, and asked for every article on the Vareth collapse. Hours later, she sat surrounded by papers, her father's name everywhere. He'd designed the tower, fought for its safety, and died, saving others when it fell. She closed the last file, her jaw tight, and made a decision. She wasn't running anymore. Deep within the archive folders, among the structural integrity reports of the doomed Frostvale Tower, Seren stumbled upon a critical redacted memo. It wasn't about the collapse itself, but about the rebuild. The document detailed an internal Vareth meeting, where the executive team led by Darren Kolith and Lyre Voss had knowingly rejected her father's original, structurally sound designs, and opted for a cheaper, inferior, and structurally dangerous imitation for the new project, all to cut costs by a significant margin. Her father's original patented safety, features the very ones he had died proving were necessary, were being deliberately excised from the new blueprints under the guise of modern streamlining. The memo also contained a chilling footnote, an email chain from Darren to his legal team, casually discussing how to subtly bury any references to the Avalith patent in their new filings. Serene leaned back, the cheap fluorescent library light reflecting off the glossy printout. This was not just about recognition or sentiment. It was about an ongoing massive corporate fraud where the same people who mocked her were actively building a future disaster based on the theft of her father's heroic legacy. The Vareth Group's board meeting was the next day, a closed-door affair in a glass-walled conference room. Darren was there, his tie perfect, his smile smug. Lyre sat nearby, typing furiously on her laptop. Mrs. Viren stood at the head, her voice sharp. "Elias, this woman is a liability. Sign the agreement to cut contact, or we pull funding." Elias leaned back, his fingers tapping the table. "And if I don't..." Darren laughed short and harsh. "You'll lose everything. She's nobody." Just moments before the expected vote to remove Elias from his position, Mrs. Viren gave Darren a tight, triumphant nod, a silent congratulation on his successful smear campaign. Darren, relishing his moment of victory, stood up and addressed the board members with an air of absolute finality. "Gentlemen, ladies, let's be clear. The girl is currently homeless and has just lost her only source of income. She has no platform, no evidence, and no legal standing. The only thing she has left is a handful of soggy newspaper clippings and a sad story, and we have already discredited that story in 3 major publications. There is zero risk of this situation impacting this meeting or our assets. We can proceed with the vote confidently knowing this distraction has been fully and permanently contained." He tapped his pen twice on the table, the small, sharp sound echoing the clinical finality of a coffin lid closing, and smiled broadly at Elias, who remained silent, giving Darren the satisfaction of having utterly dominated the entire narrative, completely oblivious to the folder that was about to walk through the mahogany door. The door opened then, and Seren walked in, a folder under her arm. The room went still. She didn't look at Elias. She set the folder down, opened it, and spread out her father's designs. "This is Frostvale Tower," she said, her voice steady. "My father's work. Your new project copies it, line for line." She slid a page forward, her father's signature clear. Darren's face paled. Lyre's mouth opened then closed. Mrs. Varen's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. Seren looked at them all, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not here for pity. I'm here for what's right." The air in the room became brittle, charged with the shock of professional ruin. Darren immediately tried to snatch the papers, lunging forward with an animalistic snarl, but Seren, with practiced speed, covered them protectively. Elias Calthorne finally moved, not to defend her or attack Darren, but to execute a chillingly precise action. He reached over, picked up a heavy glass paperweight from the table, and placed it firmly on the corner of the exposed documents, physically securing her evidence against Darren's reach. This single silent motion was his only testimony. He then looked directly at his mother, his eyes completely devoid of the usual filial respect, and simply inclined his head, an unambiguous confirmation that what Seren presented was the truth, and that he was backing her claim not as a romantic gesture, but as the CEO choosing integrity over family loyalty and corporate criminality. Mrs. Varen stared at her son, her impeccable composure crumbling under the weight of his betrayal, realizing that his silent act of placing the paperweight was the most powerful and damning vote cast in the entire meeting, sealing Darren and Lyra's fate without a single word of his own. A man in the back, an architect, stood up, his hands shaking as he examined the designs. "She's right. This is Ovalith's work." The news broke the next day. Seren Avalith, daughter of legendary architect, exposes Varith Group. The papers called her the Silent Heir. Lyra's social media went quiet, her last post a vague apology. Darren was fired within hours, his ambition no match for the truth. Mrs. Varen issued a statement clipped and formal, distancing herself from the scandal. Lyra Voss, desperate to salvage her reputation, attempted a quick public pivot. She showed up uninvited at the grand opening of a small charitable architectural exhibition, the very type of event she would usually mock, wearing a ridiculously oversized hat and attempting to offer a statement to a nearby reporter. "I was manipulated by Darren," she declared, forcing crocodile tears. "I always suspected this great injustice against Ms. Avalith." However, the exhibit's organizer, a former colleague of Seren's father who had followed the news closely, did not hesitate. He walked straight up to Lyra, placed a firm hand on her silk-covered shoulder, and very loudly announced to the assembled press and public that they would not be hosting any Varith Group associates who had participated in the deliberate desecration of an honorable architect's legacy. He then physically escorted Lyra Hat and all past the flashing cameras and out the front door, stripping her of the last shred of her professional dignity and forcing her to face the full immediate consequence of her venomous actions in the public eye, a humiliation far more devastating than a simple firing. Seren didn't read any of it. She walked through Frostvale, her scarf pulled tight, ignoring the stares. A kid dropped his phone, the screen showing her face. She kept walking her steps, sure her bag heavy with her father's sketchbook. A month later, a new article hit Elias Kalethorn, engaged to financier's daughter. The photo showed him at a gala, a woman on his arm, her smile perfect. Seren saw it at a gas station, the TV blaring. She paid for her coffee, her hands steady, and walked out. That night, Lyra called, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Guess he played the hero for nothing, huh? You really thought you'd win." Seren hung up without answering. She packed her father's designs, booked a bus ticket, and walked to the bridge where her father had saved Elias. Snow fell soft and quiet as she stood there, her breath visible in the cold. A limousine pulled up as she turned to leave. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed Frostvale Towers design rights signed over to her and a foundation for architects. A note in Elias's handwriting read, "I'm not engaged. I'm just giving you what's yours." Seren's fingers traced the words, her eyes dry. She looked up, the city lights blurred by snow. The driver tipped his hat. "He's on TV tonight," he said, then drove off. Seren walked to a bar where a TV played Elias's voice. "I'm stepping down as CEO. Frostvale Tower belongs to Seren Avalith." The news exploded. Billionaire gives up empire for architect's daughter. Comments flooded in, some calling her a manipulator, others a hero. Seren didn't read them. She went to the library, donated her father's sketchbook, and walked away. Weeks later, Lyra's name vanished from Varith's website, her career tanked by her own leaked emails. Darren lost his sponsorships, his name toxic. Mrs. Varen retired to her estate, her influence fading. Seren didn't care. She moved to a small apartment, started teaching art to kids, and let the world move on. Christmas Eve came and Frostvale Square glowed with lights. The new Frostvale Tower stood tall, its glass catching the snow. A crowd gathered their breath, fogging the air. Elias stepped onto the rooftop stage, his coat dusted white. "They say I was fooled," he said, his voice steady through the speakers. "But I waited 10 years to find the daughter of the man who saved me." He walked down the crowd parting and found Seren at the edge. He knelt, snow soaking his knee, and held out his hand. Not 1 hour. A lifetime. The crowd roared, tears in their eyes as snow fell like a blessing. Seren's focus, however, was not on the cheering crowd or the blinding lights. It was solely on the hand Elias offered her. She saw not the hand of a billionaire, but the hand of the boy her father had pulled from the rubble 10 years ago. As she reached out, she noticed a faint, jagged scar tracing a line across the back of his wrist. an old, barely visible mark from the collapse. Elias saw her gaze fall on it, and without breaking eye contact, he gently turned his wrist over, silently offering the scar as a mute permanent witness to the debt he had carried. It was the deepest, most profound confession of gratitude and shared history. He could offer a physical pledge that their connection was built on a foundation of sacrifice, not fleeting romance. She closed her fingers around his hand, her movement not one of acceptance but of recognition. She was grasping the truth of her father's heroism and the weight of the life he had saved. Her expression remained serene, but a single crystalline tear tracked a path through the snow, dusting her cheek, the silent proof that she had finally found home. Leroy stood at the back, her face pale, her phone silent. Darren watched from a bar across town, his glass untouched. Mrs. Varon saw it on TV, her hands folded tight. Seren looked at Elias, her eyes clear, and took his hand. The crowd's cheers faded to a hum, the snow soft around them. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She just stood there, her presence enough. The world had judged her, mocked her, misunderstood her. But now, they saw her, and that was enough. Some moments cut deep leave scars you can't see. She carried them, but she never let them own her. You've felt that, haven't you? The weight of being unseen, unheard, but you kept going, and so did she. You're not alone in this. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.